Okay, so we're going to be looking at Parshat Vayakhel. This coming Shabbat is a joint, it's a double parsha, Vayakhel Pkudei. But we're going to be looking at Vayakhel, the first three psukim, the first three verses of the parsha. So I want to apologize ahead of time. I had a lot of difficulty putting together today's shir. I'm showing you guys my hand, so to say. There isn't so much Midrash on Vayakhel Pkudei. Vayakhel Pkudei is basically a repeat of, and actually this will serve as an important introduction to what we're going to see during the class as well. Where we are as far as the process, or the process of Sefer Shmot. So we're at the very end of Sefer Shmot, and what we've seen the past few weeks is Parshat Yitro, right? Let's start from the beginning. The first 2-3 parshas, we saw the enslavement in Mitzrayim, the 10 plagues, the Exodus, splitting of the sea in Beshalach. Then we come to Parshat Yitro, where Hashem appears to us in Har Sinai, speaks to us the 10 Commandments, and then goes on in Parshat Mishpatim to start giving us the laws of the Torah. Then we have Truma Tetzaveh, which is, everyone with me? Yeah. Then we have Truma Tetzaveh, which is the commandment of building the Mishkan. Parshat Kitisa, which we just read, which the main point, content of the parsha is the sin of the golden calf, Chet HaEgel, and the events right beforehand, the events right afterwards. And then we have Vayakhel Pkudei, which is simply the carrying out of all the commandments that we received in Truma Tetzaveh. Meaning, in Truma Tetzaveh we have 2 parshas dedicated to the commandment of all the details of building and erecting the Mishkan. And then in Vayakhel Pkudei, we have just the execution of all those details. So there's actually very, very limited commentary on Vayakhel Pkudei. If you were to look and look for how much Rashi there's in Vayakhel Pkudei, there's barely any Rashi on those 2 whole parshas. Go ahead. Take a look. You'll see there's really very, very little. Because most of it he explained during Trumat Tetzaveh when it was being commanded. And also the Midrash, there is very limited Midrash on Vayakhel Pkudei. So, as it is on a regular week, I have to go through a lot of Midrash to find a Midrash or two that really fits what we're trying to do, which is to see how the Midrash is acting as an actual commentary on a specific verse. So I had a very big challenge this week, and I share that with you because I did end up finding some very, very interesting Midrashim, but I'm going to need your help because I did not have a chance to fully process. I have some beginning thoughts, but it's not completely formed. So unlike other times, I'm not going to try to direct you guys to specific questions or specific answers, because in my own mind it's not completely formed. I just have really the very beginnings. So I just want to be completely honest. So it's going to be a joint learning, which is probably sometimes even a better experience. Okay. With that said, but the introduction is important not only as a disclaimer, but also because that background information will play in to understanding what the Midrash is doing. Okay, so let's start by reading the verses, the psukim. I will be reading again. If there are any big differences between what I'm reading and what you got, the translation you're looking at, please let me know. Okay, so we'll try to figure out if those are important or not important. Okay. So the verse says the following: Moshe then congregated the whole Israelite community and said to them, "These are the things that Hashem has commanded you to do. On 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day you shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death." Wait, I think I'm reading a translation that I have a problem with. Can someone please read to me that second verse from your...
On 6 days work may be done, but the seventh day shall be holy for you, a day of complete rest for Hashem. Whoever does work on it shall be put to death.
Okay, so we'll see that. The Midrash. We'll see when we look at one of the Midrashim that we're going to be looking at. We'll see that it's going to read the verse a little bit based on a different translation. But okay, that's good enough for now. And then the third verse: "You shall kindle no fire, or you shall light no fire throughout your settlements on the Sabbath day." So no, that's not a good translation. Let me do it. I'm going to change it. You shall not burn a fire throughout all, right? In Hebrew it says bechol, throughout all your settlements on the Sabbath day. How is it translated over there?
Our scroll says you shall not kindle fire in any of your dwellings on the Shabbat.
In any of your dwellings, okay. Also, that's okay. Also, just the translation I'm reading from doesn't have the word all or any, and one of those words that's missing from the translation I'm reading in. Okay, so read through it again on your own. These are the three verses we're looking at. And by the way, if those are the verses we'll be asking about, but I do want to point out. Look at the next verses. "Take from among you gifts to the Lord. Everyone whose heart so moves him shall bring them." The next verse: blue, purple, crimson yarns, fine linen. Right. Then it goes on, verse 10. "And let all among you who are skilled come and make all that the Lord has commanded. The tabernacle, its tent." Verse 12. "And the ark and its poles, the cover." Verse 13. "The table." Right. Verse 14. The menorah for lighting, its furnishings, etc., etc., etc. It goes on and on and on and on. It just basically tells of the actual building of the Mishkan, and that's basically the rest of this parsha and most of next week's parsha. Or actually, this week it's joint. So right after these three verses about Shabbat, it suddenly goes and says, "Okay, now we're going to tell you what it looked like when they actually built the Mishkan." So based on all this, let's ask some questions.
I guess the first obvious question is, you think that after the colon of "these are the things," it would follow with a list of things as opposed to interrupt with Shabbos.
Okay. So you're saying when it says these, well, you're assuming, right? You're assuming that when it says "these things," it's referring to what's going to say in verse 4 and onward, which is the Mishkan. Right?
I suppose the command is also not to work on Shabbos.
Yes. Right. No, Paul. You're right. You're right. That's an alternative, but there's a difficulty with that as well. So you're saying option one is "these things" is referring to the Mishkan, and therefore why are you interrupting it with Shabbos? Other option is what? That "these things" is referring to what?
Shabbos is a thing.
To Shabbat.
Shabbos is a thing as well.
Yes, but Shabbat is a thing, not things. Right? Because what is... Are there commandments here about Shabbat or commandment?
The way the English translates, it says "these are the things," plural.
Right. And so if you want to understand that the things that Moshe is commanding them is Shabbat, the problem with that is that when you go on and read what it says about Shabbat, it's only one commandment. Singular. Which is not to do work.
No, it's not.
What?
Before Shabbat it says
So you're saying these things, so very nice. You're saying these things is two things. One, during 6 days, you have an obligation to work. And the 7th day, you have an obligation not to work. Okay, definitely an acceptable and reasonable answer. But even so, we're going to leave the question, even though we have I think a very acceptable answer, which in itself I think is an important answer and an interesting one. The idea that this verse can and has been read by many as a commandment of working on 6 days. But even though we have an answer, the Midrash is going to give a different answer to this, so that is definitely going to be one of our answers. When it says these things, what is it referring to? Okay? Other questions? Yes?
This is a two-part question. What is the definition of work?
Good.
Is kindling fire different than work?
Those are the two questions?
Two parts.
Excellent. Question 1 was, when it says work, what qualifies as work? And then I'm going to take the second part of your question, which I think is the much more significant one, and I'm going to expand it a little bit. You said, what's the relationship between don't kindle a fire and what you just said? At verse 2 it says, don't do work. Verse 3 says, don't kindle a fire. Is this one and the same? Is this two separate things? A, don't do work. B, don't kindle a fire. Right? And if it's one and the same, then the question would be, why are you pointing out specifically this one? Right? Right. So either
39, why on fire?
Right. Wait. We don't know anything about 39. Not yet. Right? So, you come and you make a blanket statement, don't do work, which leads to its own question, define work, right? But besides that, you make a categorical statement, and then you bring one specific. Is the specific identical to the category? Is the only thing you're not allowed to do? Is verse 3 an explanation of verse 2? Or is it a different category? Right, that's the question that you're asking basically. What's the relationship between don't do work, don't do a melacha, we're going to use the phrase, I guess I translated it in the Midrash, melacha, I think I translated it as a work action, for lack of a better translation. But so verse 2 comes and says you're not allowed to do a melacha, and verse 3 comes and says don't light a fire. So this is a very important question for us. What is the relationship between these two verses and these two phrases, melacha and lighting a fire? Yes. Other questions?
Fire looks like creation.
Fire looks like creation. Okay. I would agree, but there's wait. I would agree, but in the text, we don't see any attempt. We don't see the Torah describing what fire is. Meaning, of course, obviously the Torah knows, when it says fire, it means something specific, but we don't see it giving it any kind of description. It just states it. It says, do not do work on Shabbat. Do not light fire on Shabbat. So it's a very basic, but it's a big one. This is going to be a big one for us. The Midrash is definitely going to deal with this, and the Midrash deals. I only brought one or two small Midrashim on it, but the Midrash deals with it quite a lot to try to understand the relationship between these two verses, because it is very perplexing. You just said, don't do melacha on Shabbat. So assuming we could figure out what melacha is, why do you have to come and single out one of them? So you're saying because you're answering that fire is creative. Could be. But
can I ask another question?
Sure.
In your dwelling places, and if not in my dwelling place, can I do this?
I was wondering about that.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you.
Not in your dwelling
Ah, very good. Excellent. Excellent. She's saying the phrase in your dwelling places, right? It seems like a very strange phrase. In Hebrew, lo tevaru esh b'chol mashvotechem. Do not create or burn or kindle fire in all the places. I guess dwellings is a good translation. All the places where you sit, or all the places where you live, or all the places where you dwell. What is the purpose of this phrase? What would be missing from the verse if it just said, do not kindle fire on Shabbat?
At all.
No, you don't need to say at all. It's like, you don't have to say, thou shalt not murder. You don't have to say, lo tirtzach bichlal. You don't have to say, don't murder at all. Right? Meaning all the Torah needs to say is, don't murder. It doesn't have to say, don't murder anywhere. It doesn't have to say, don't murder in your dwelling. Let's say like this. If in the Ten Commandments, Hashem said to us, thou shalt not steal anywhere where you live. That would be very strange to us. Right?
If you're going to Europe, you can steal cows.
It seems to, exactly. This word in your dwellings seems to, even though the phrasing is a restrictive phrasing, don't do this. But when you come and say, if it's categorical, if it's absolute and categorical, you just say, don't kindle fire on Shabbat. When you come in and say, don't kindle in any of, right, that's what it says, in any of your dwellings, so you immediately, someone who has a legal type of mind or has grown accustomed to kind of read between the lines of the language, comes and says, wait a second, if you're specifying where I'm not allowed to kindle fire, that must mean that what? That there are certain places where I can kindle fire on Shabbat. Right?
Yeah, it limits the restriction.
It limits the restriction, exactly. But it's interesting because the language is restrictive language. But when you come and you it seems like it's qualifying the restriction, which immediately leads to the question of what is not included in this restriction. Okay, this is a startling concept that we're discovering here. That in the language of the Torah, it seems that there's somewhere that you're allowed to light fire or kindle fire on Shabbat. So, A, is this a correct reading? B, where is this place? Okay. Any other questions? We got quite a few already. Let's repeat our main questions. Do it in reverse order based on my memory. So the first is, why is it restricting lighting fire only in the dwellings? Meaning, is there indeed a place? And if so, where is it? Where is that place that we are allowed to kindle fire on Shabbat? Okay, and obviously, secondary to that is like, why? Our second question is, what is the relationship between verse 3, which says, restricts but only kind of lighting or kindling fire on Shabbat, with the categorical prohibition of doing any type of work? And going back to our first verse, which was, when Moshe is commanding these things, which things is it referring to? Anyone got anything else? Yeah.
I had one more, not so strong a question, but the seventh day is holy, a day of rest. So why is resting something that's holy? Why is the fact that resting equals holy?
So he's saying, let's look at, over here, we are going to see the Midrash talk about this point, but that's where, when I said before that the way we're reading it, the Midrash is going to read it a little bit differently. But yes, the question stand. I'll accept the question, so to say, which is, it seems to come and say that if the day is holy, that means you should rest. So you're asking, why is a holy day translate Why is a day that is holy immediately mean a day in which we're not working? Why is holiness connected to that? Why is that what holiness means? And if so, why is that what holiness means? Yes, Alex.
Why can't you be holy by creating?
Right. Yeah. Why not? Why can't you be holy while working? Right? Isn't that what, don't we see, as a fundamental concept of, bringing holiness into the physical world, into all our actions can be holy. So, this seems to counter that idea a little bit. Yeah, Alex.
Repeating itself. We just had it in the previous Parsha. Like why this out of the 10 Commandments? Why are they bringing it again? Why wasn't it enough that
Alex? Thank you. That was our missing question. What's new here? Why is this being repeated here? Twice already, we've been told that we are not to do work on Shabbat. Maybe even 3 times. I don't even remember. Obviously in the 10 Commandments. Also in Parshat Mishpatim. And I think also again in Parshat Kitisa. I think this is the... What?
Yeah, the last week's Parsha.
Yeah. But I think also in Mishpatim. So why is this suddenly appear here? And I'll add to that question, it doesn't appear in context with anything. It just randomly talks about, don't do a melacha on Shabbat. You shouldn't light fire or kindle fire in your dwellings on Shabbat. And then it goes on for the next 50 psukim to talk about, building the Mishkan. What is it doing here? You just told us this. Any ideas? Anyone want to try to answer that one? Yes.
That's the whole reason why that what you have to do for the Mishkan, because that's how we learn the definition of work. Because all these malachot that you do,
okay,
not supposed to do on Shabbat.
Okay, so.
Jumping the gun.
What?
I may be jumping the gun.
No. You're not jumping the gun. Sorry, I just want to repeat because I was barely able to hear you. So I want to repeat your answer for those who are watching now live and those who are going to watch it later or tomorrow. So the answer was that, and just please confirm that I'm getting this right. What you said, I'm getting this accurately. Which is that this is how we know the definition of melacha, the prohibited melacha, or the definitions of the melacha that we're forbidden from doing on Shabbat, because it appears in the context of the Mishkan. Right? Right. So no, you're not jumping the gun, because that is absolutely the answer. One of the questions that I was hoping to deal with today, but I didn't find the Midrash on the Parsha to help me do it, and I try not to force an issue if the text doesn't bear it. So I'm happy you brought this up. A very, very common question that people have is the 39 melachot. Is the fact that wherever the Torah talks about Isur Shabbat, it barely gives any type of specific prohibition. And even when it does, it's fire, it's maybe plowing and sowing. It's very, very few. In the Torah itself, very, very, very limited restrictions are given. And whereas the Torah seems to continuously be emphasizing the idea of Shabbat. Almost as if the Torah doesn't want to go into specifics. I mean, the Torah has no problem going into specifics about every other thing. And when it comes to Shabbat, all it does is come and say, this is a really important idea. If you believe in Hashem, you have to keep Shabbat. And if you don't keep Shabbat, you don't believe in Hashem. And if you don't keep Shabbat, you don't believe that God took us out of Egypt. And if you don't keep Shabbat, you don't believe that God created and creates and governs the world. And if you don't keep Shabbat, then you should be stoned to death. And it just gives these blanket statements. Don't do any work. Rest. It's holy. And a lot of people have a tremendous difficulty with the fact that something that seems very reasonable, very logical, through its blanket statement of holiness, rest, peace, which we kind of assume that means the ability to be with family and introspection, all these things that none of them are written in the Torah, but kind of make sense to us. But Chazal come and say, oh no, there are these 39 categories, and those 39 categories include 10,000 other details that restrict, every aspect of, what we usually consider everyday normal life on Shabbat, and saying, and it's all an Isser from the Torah. So what you're saying now is correct, and again, this is probably at the end we might say a little bit more about this, but by the mere fact that these verses are placed where they are, when they seem completely unnecessary. I'm talking about the entire, without going into specifics of the three of what each verse is saying. The concept of resting, a holy day of rest, of restrictions or not working, the fact that it appears so out of context after it was told to us already, and it appears right there smack in the middle of the Mishkan, is the source for coming and saying, by the Torah inserting this, or by Moshe giving the commandment right before they start building the Mishkan. He says, wait, before you start building the Mishkan, there's something really important that needs to be repeated and reminded. And for 6 days, you can work. But on the 7th day, you're not allowed to work. Why would he need to remind them of that right before they begin to work on the Mishkan? And again, for this we don't need Midrash, which is the simple understanding being is, must be that what? That all these things you're about to do in order to build the Mishkan can be done throughout the 6 days, but are included in the things you cannot do on Shabbat. Otherwise, why repeat it here? Yes, Paul?
Could we say that one might think that building the Mishkan is like the most holy activity you can do?
Okay. Now, Paul, you are jumping the gun.
Okay.
So at this point, I have to stop you. Okay.
Fair enough. I'm happy to stop in mid-bullet. But
right.
Just because I asked the question before, and so I was like...
No. Paul, you're right. The answer is exactly. And that's what the Midrash is going to deal with. The balance between those things. Okay? Okay. Okay. Now we're ready for the Midrash. Let me just open it up here. Okay. Says the Midrash. I'm not sure we're going to get through all three, but we will try. Says the Midrash, and Moshe congregated, or gathered. Why was this said? Now again, remember, as we always do with the commentator, we first ask ourselves, did he answer the questions, or which questions did he answer? And then we ask ourselves, okay, now he answered this is how he answered it, and then what questions do we have on that answer? Okay. Why was this said? Meaning, when you see it says, in Moshe congregated ... meaning, and referring to this whole clump of verses about Shabbat. Why was this said? With the understanding being this is out of place, this doesn't seem to belong. Why was this said? Because it says, and they shall make for me a mikdash. They shall make for me a tabernacle. They shall make for me a temple. They shall make for me a mikdash. was said in Shemot 25, right? A few parshas ago, there's a commandment to make a mikdash. I understand, says the Midrash, it applies for both the mundane days and the week of the week and Shabbat. Meaning, the Midrash starts out by saying, the fact that the mitzvah says, you shall make for me a mikdash without any kind of reservation, it means you need to do this, and you can do it when? Always. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Continues the Midrash. And in what way do I observe, and its desecrators shall be put to death? Right? Because in a different place it says, that anyone who desecrates or profanes or violates Shabbat is punishable by death, and it should be put to death. The Midrash says, in what way? I should have done a short introduction. We usually see Midrashim that are more story-oriented. This one is not. This is a lot more similar to a legal, more of a legalistic Midrash. Okay, but so it's a little more difficult to understand than the Midrashim we usually see. But I felt it was very, very significant and important. So we'll power through it. I'm going to go back to the beginning of that paragraph. And in what way do I observe in its desecrators shall be put to death? Okay. Answers continues the Midrash, with regards to all other melachot, work actions, except for the work of the Mishkan, or also with regard to the melachot of the Mishkan. Meaning, so the Midrash is asking a question. When it says that the desecrators of Shabbat shall be killed, does this include to all melachot except the melachot of building the Mishkan, or does desecrators of Shabbat should be put to death include all the melachot needed to build the Mishkan? Okay, as we read this, try to think, what is the Midrash trying to do here? Okay, continues the Midrash. And in what way do I observe, and you shall make for me a mikdash? During all other days of the week except Shabbat, or also on Shabbat? Okay, so it's saying I have two different obligations. One, building a mikdash, and another, killing someone who not violating Shabbat with the penalty of death. And the Midrash about both of them is debating. It seems uncertain. Are they categorical to include Shabbat or not? You shall make a mikdash even on Shabbat? And on the other hand, kill someone who works on Shabbat, even someone who's building the mikdash? Yes. Comments. Because it's a very different type of midrash, I will take comments and questions and in the middle. Go ahead.
Of Shabbat coming before it continues on, speak about the Mikdash, that we are supposed to understand from this that specifically pertaining to the building of the Mikdash, you cannot violate the Shabbat. Had this not been put here, they might have thought that they should continue on to build and put together the Mishkan even on Shabbat because of the mitzvah of building this place for a Kodesh Baruch Hu.
Well, I'm not sure what he's saying now. You're giving an opinion based on how you understand the verses. The Midrash is a lot less sure than you are.
Yes, it is.
The Midrash is struggling with this. It's struggling with it. No, I hear what you're saying. No, wait. I hear what you're saying. You're saying, let's leave the Midrash on the side for a second. Perfectly fine. Saying, if we look at the verses themselves and the placement of the verses, you're saying it seems pretty obvious. It seems pretty obvious. I'm not being sarcastic at all. I would agree that in the Pshat, it seems like it's saying, listen, before you start building the Mishkan, don't forget the rules we've said until now still apply. The rule of not working on Shabbat still applies, even to all the stuff you're about to do of building a Mishkan. But the Midrash, for whatever reason, okay, the Midrash doesn't start off with that understanding. The Midrash starts off with a struggle. I think this is an important point. The Midrash starts off with is debating it. It's not sure. He says, listen, on the one hand, there's a mitzvah which was not limited, which is build a mikdash. It was not quantified by time. It was not qualified by time. And on the other hand, there's a prohibition from desecrating the Shabbat to the point that it's a capital crime. And also over there, it didn't say, all its desecrators shall be put to death unless they're building the mikdash. The Torah knows how to qualify its rules. Either explicitly qualifying it, or by adding in an extra word, or some difficulty in the language which leaves room for interpretation, or leaves room for understanding that there's something else that needs to be noticed. But the Midrash here comes and says, it almost seems like it's going to an effort to make this a difficult debate. Let's continue a little bit to the end of this Midrash. Right, so the Midrash now is stuck between these two massive things. Okay? Of Shabbat versus the Mikdash. That's what the Midrash did here. It created a head-on clash between the Mikdash and Shabbat. Okay, we're going to have to try to think, what does this mean? Okay, that would be the next stage. Okay, after we understand what the Midrash or what the commentator is doing, we then go and say, okay, why is he doing it? What is he trying to get to? What is the assumption that it's or the goal that it's achieving by doing this? But it's too early. We didn't see how it ends up. Says, and it's yes, please, yes.
Coming back to the Psukim about fire, and then immediately the Psukim that we didn't read, but if you're looking, it's mentioned gold, silver, copper, everything was here, like 90%. You need fire. You need to melt gold. You need to melt this. You have to make hooks to dye.
Right. You're right. You need to boil water in order to dye the wool. You need to. Yeah. Right.
What he mentioned here, just don't kindle fire, and that's it. And then he tells you what you need, and you just understand that for this you need fire. But before it was said not to kindle fire. So
okay.
it's just here.
So you're strengthening the sentiment of, it seems very clear that the entire these three verses and the commandment of Shabbat here is brought in to qualify, or not to qualify, to remind us, or to limit the work of the Mishkan, which again strengthens very much the idea that based on the works of the Mishkan, that leads to the very logical conclusion that all of the things that were done in the Mishkan are prohibited on Shabbat. And there you go, we just gave birth to all of Hilchot Shabbat. But again, what you are all seeing and reading into the Pshat, which I don't disagree with, the Midrash doesn't go that way. The Midrash says, no, I'm not so sure. The Midrash is debating this. Not because of its placement over here, but because there was a mitzvah given to us to build a Bet Mikdash, and nowhere did it say, except on Shabbat. Now, this is where we come in, we would ask a question on the Parshan, saying, but why would it need to say that if it says in a different place, don't do any work on Shabbat. But wait. I don't want to answer this yet, because I think that's the deeper part here that we need to wait. Okay, let's see the rest of the Midrash. So right now the Midrash has brought us to this, we got Shabbat on the one hand and the Mikdash on the other, and the Midrash saying, I don't know which one is wins. Okay, who beats who? So then the Midrash continues. Logic extrapolates. Okay, meaning if we were to follow our logic, then we would answer our conundrum in the following way. And I'll read it and then I'll explain. And what if? It's a bad language. It's a bad translation of mine. But what if the sacrificial work, which can only happen because of the tools meaning all the vessels, in order to do. Let me just read the whole sentence. And what if it's not a what if? I don't know. It's a bad translation. And what if the sacrificial work, which can only happen because of the tools, overrides Shabbat? Then the tools themselves, that the sacrificial work comes only because of them, shouldn't it be that it overrides Shabbat? I'll explain what it's a very poor translation, and I'm sorry, it's my translation. He says the following: look, we know for a fact, from a different place, not from here, that sacrifices are brought on Shabbat. Okay? That the work of the Mishkan, of the Bet Mikdash itself, not of building it, okay? The actual daily religious practices, the morning sacrifice, the evening sacrifice, the Musaf sacrifice, the Ktoret, the incense, that the worship, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm kind of lost for. I'm missing the word. Yeah.
Would also the avodah of Trumat Hadeshen and also Hadlakat Menorah, would that also take place on Shabbat?
Yes.
So all of the work, that kindling of fire, slaughtering, burning, all would take place on Shabbat in the Mishkan.
So the Midrash is saying like this. We know, and right now we don't have, based on several places, we know for a fact, that's our assumption right now, that the regular work, okay, of the Bet Mikdash, the sacrifices, okay, primarily, without going into too much detail, primarily all the work that involves in the sacrifices is done on Shabbat, even though it's melachas. Okay? So actually, no, kindling of the fire and the menorah, I don't think so. I don't remember. The truth is I don't remember. I don't think so. But everything to do with the sacrifices, yes. But you have to understand that there's a lot of deoraita actions, melachot, that are done in the process of doing a korban. Okay? Slaughtering is an issur deoraita. Many of the putting the flesh of the thing on the fire, that's an issur deoraita. There's many, but we learn from several places quite explicitly, that the work of the Mikdash, the daily work of the Mikdash, overrides Shabbat. So this, but again, we're still in the middle of the Midrash. The Midrash says logic extrapolates. If the sacrifice work overrides Shabbat, and how do you get to the point where you could actually do the sacrifices? Only if you build the Mishkan, build the Mikdash, build make all the tools, the knife that you're going to slaughter with, the vessel you're going to catch the blood of the animal in order to toss it onto the altar, the whatever, hundreds, dozens, if not hundreds of different types of vessels, building the mizbeach, building the ramp, building the kior, the sink from where the kohanim will wash their hands and feet, whatever. So says the Midrash is saying like this. Logic extrapolates that just like if the sacrificial work overrides Shabbat, then also the building.
It's almost the preparation for the
Yeah, it's not almost. It is. You're saying to me. What?
I don't understand the logic.
Why?
Because I would have thought these circumstances where you could do the sacrificial work, but you have to prepare for it before Shabbos. You can't necessarily do that on Shabbos just because you can do the sacrificial.
Why? Why?
I understand what the Midrash is coming down. Because if you're allowed to use these tools that are going to be used on Shabbat, why can't you make them on Shabbat because you're going to use them on Shabbat?
Exactly.
I know, but
Meaning exactly that. That's exactly what the Midrash is saying. What, Paul? I'm sorry?
I'm just struggling with the logic because there has to be a limit where you can go back and do, and you're supposed to prepare in order to be able to do. So why, with this necessary logic out, you're allowed to do
I agree.
preparation?
I agree. This is where I did not have enough time to really process this and think about it. I have a what?
You can do a bris. Thinking about a bris. You can do a bris, but you can't make the knife.
Right.
I've had to make the knife before.
Forget about that. You're not allowed to bring the knife on Shabbat.
Right.
You're not allowed to bring the knife, even though you're allowed to use. It's an excellent point. Even though you're allowed to use the knife to do something which is an Isser D'Oraita, but Brit Milah overrides Shabbat. But preparing for Brit Milah doesn't override Shabbat. If I left the knife for the Brit Milah in a different, outside the Eruv, I am not allowed to bring it because I could have done that before Shabbat. I couldn't have done the Brit Milah before Shabbat, but I could have brought the knife before Shabbat. So you're saying that logic should apply here. So this is where we get to the point where we come and say, well, so obviously the Midrash has some kind of assumption about the relationship between preparing the avoda and doing the avoda that is different than just A leads to B. The Midrash has an assumption here that the process of preparing the mikdash, meaning like this, and the truth is, it's not hard to defend this idea. Is there a mitzvah to bring the Brit Milah knife before Friday into the Eruv? No, it's not an independent mitzvah. It's something that will allow me to do the mitzvah on Shabbat. Is there a mitzvah to make the vessels of the mikdash? Yes.
I think so, yes.
Yes, Vasuli Mikdash. There is a mitzvah. Look, all of Parshat Truma and Tetzaveh, there's a mitzvah to make the altar. There's a mitzvah to make the aron. There's a mitzvah to make the spatula that's going to be used. They are independent mitzvot, and the Midrash understands that those independent mitzvot are more part of the mitzvah of the sacrifice itself than Brit Milah, than bringing the knife is for Brit Milah, which is just a technical. Okay.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, let's continue. So that's what logic would dictate, says the Midrash. So then the Midrash answers, the Torah teaches, and Moshe congregated on the mundane days, and Moshe congregated the people, ... and told them, you may work 6 days of the week, but don't work on Shabbat. On the mundane days, you should build the Mishkan, not Shabbat. And then the Midrash goes on to say, and he said to them, these are the things. Rebbe said to include 39 categories of melacha that Moshe said to them orally, which is basically exactly what you said earlier before. Forgot who someone said before. Look, this is the place where he told them, look, all these things, I'm going to tell you, you're not allowed to do melacha on Shabbat. I'm telling you this now because all the things that you're about to do for the Mishkan, all those things, you can't do them on Shabbat. There you go. Those are the 39 things you can't do on Shabbat. Now, what is the Midrash? Here now comes that question. Okay. The Midrash has answered several of our questions. It answered what is these? These, the 39 melachas. Right? It answered a question of... It answered... what else did it answer? Well, let's...
Why did we bring that? Why is the law of Shabbat brought here again?
Right, why is it brought here again? Yes, why is it brought here again? We have not answered yet anything about fire. Okay, that's still open. But we'll see if we'll get to it. Maybe we'll just get to it very quickly, because this is taking longer than I expected. But it's fine. I think it's worth it. What is a difficulty with the Midrash? We said it before. A difficulty is, why doesn't the Midrash go the easy route that you all said? Which made perfect sense, by the way. Why is the Midrash going out of its way? Right, the Midrash is going out of its way to heighten the tension between Shabbat and the Bet Mikdash. Yeah.
Might it just because the Torah I want to rewrite the Torah? Could it not be more explicit and simply just say, maybe the rabbi said this before, do not build the Mishkan on Shabbat, rather than sort of hint to it? And the fact that it's hinting to it, maybe there's something deeper, and that's why the question.
Right. So, right. It is what it is. Well, it's what you're saying. It's what we kind of said before, which is that, why doesn't the Midrash come and say, "Thou shalt not murder"? Is this only on the weekdays, or is this also on Shabbat? Well, the mitzvah over there didn't qualify it either. The Midrash is acting like, well, if it didn't explicitly say, it says we shall build a mikdash, but it didn't say whether this is every day of the week or not. But why would you even consider that? What would cause the Midrash to wonder that?
They're both holy activities.
So obviously there's something about building a mikdash and about keeping Shabbat. There's something about these two mitzvot that the Midrash understands is categorical, is absolute, and therefore it basically comes. It says, the way it's phrasing it almost is like, should I make a mikdash even on Shabbat, or should desecrators die even for the sake of the mikdash? Right? And it's treating each one as if it is absolute, without any reservation. Whereas most mitzvot, we understand that there's some kind of balance and that they fit in like a puzzle with the other mitzvot. Over here, the Midrash is saying, I'm not sure if these mitzvot can live in peace with the other mitzvah, or is it categorical, absolute, and all the way? Right? That's what it's doing. Do I need to keep Shabbat even at the expense of building Bet HaMikdash? Or do I need to build Bet HaMikdash even at the expense of violating Shabbat? So the question, all I've done now is try to heighten the question. Why is the Midrash doing this? So it seems to be that the Midrash is forcing us to understand there's something about these two concepts which are very similar, Okay, very, very similar in how total they are. In the sense that our assumption is that they are categorical and without exception. Yes. Anyone want to try to take it to the next step and try to understand why? What is similar about those two things that would cause us to think that they are absolute without any reservation? Yes.
You look like you do something that God did. He worked for 6 days, and then he stopped. So it's not physical that you're building Mishkan. It's what is said, you're going to build something, and I'm going to be inside you. My dwelling place is going to be inside you, like in your heart, in your mind. You are building yourself. Not tomorrow, because till this day, nobody knew about 1 day of rest at the week. It was something that people, they didn't understand. What do you mean you don't work? You have to milk your cow. You have to do something. So maybe by not building physical Beit HaMikdash, you're just building something inside you by
well, if I understand what you're saying, if I understand correctly what you're saying, but you're only making one side of the argument. You are now trying to explain why Shabbat would override the Mikdash. But the Midrash is not doing that. The Midrash is doing that on both sides. It's saying, I'm not sure if Shabbat overrides the Mikdash, or should the Mikdash override Shabbat. Now, by the way, the Midrash does resolve it, right? The Midrash, how does the Midrash resolve it? What is the answer the Midrash actually gives?
It uses the word, Elu Hadvarim, and these are the things. It uses that specific quote from the Torah. The Midrash is bringing it down that when it's stating and these things, it's actually referring to the malachot that are involved with building of the Mishkan.
Right. And it does it in two stages. It does it also one verse before, and when it comes and says the fact that at this point in the story Moshe congregates them and tells them, reminds them about Shabbat, means that Shabbat overrides the preparation of the Mikdash. The mitzvah of what?
Is it saying that Moshe congregated them not on Shabbat, but on a mundane day to tell them this message?
Yeah. Yeah, it's saying he congregated them before they started working, saying, as you're about to work, I want to make it clear. Okay. These things of building, of fulfilling the obligation of building a Mikdash does not override Shabbat. Okay? So, according to the Midrash answers the answer that half of you gave earlier at the beginning. But the Midrash first wants you to feel a certain tension between a very, very serious tension between Shabbat and wants you to think of them as categorical, of building a Mikdash and resting on Shabbat. So,
because I guess, Rabbi, what it's saying is not only does Shabbat trump building the Mishkan, but it also defines what keeping Shabbat is.
Right. Yes, I agree. That's the knockout. Right. The Midrash ends with a knockout. The Midrash says not only, you're right, excellent point. Not only, as you guys said before, not only is the Midrash saying, Moshe saying, no, Shabbat is more important than building the Mishkan. It goes to say, and by the way, all the things you're doing in the Mishkan, those are the exact things that you're not allowed to do on Shabbat.
Which mention itself explains why it has to be mentioned again, even though we
Yes.
talked about Shabbat
Yes.
several times before.
But Shabbat here, so to say, wins with a knockout. Okay? But it seemed important for the Midrash. We're kind of going, I want to go forward. I want to go forward a little bit because I do want to see one more Midrash that I think might help us. I'm not sure. Either it's going to really confuse us or it's going to kind of add another level to this, or another depth to this. But it seems to come and say, it wants you to think. At first, it wants you to think of Shabbat and of resting on Shabbat, doing nothing on Shabbat, and building, creating, not serving in Bet HaMikdash. Serving in Bet HaMikdash, the Midrash says, yeah, that's fine. That we know overrides Shabbat. But creating holiness, creating a holy place, the Midrash wants you to think of the action of fulfilling the obligation of creating a holy place as important, or even maybe it wants you to think of it even as more important, possibly, than holy time. Because that's what Bet HaMikdash is versus Shabbat. Shabbat is holy time. Right? And Bet HaMikdash is holy space. And Shabbat in Bet HaMikdash, there's this like symbiotic situation where you can do, meaning where it is not, meaning that it is not an isser to do certain things in the Bet HaMikdash on Shabbat, but creating a holy space. So it's like the Midrash has two phases. Phase one, it wants you to think of holy time and holy space as equally powerful. Meaning when I say powerful, I choose that word on purpose because the Midrash is debating and it offers an option of holy space is more important than holy time. Right? That, could it be maybe the obligation of creating a mikdash even extends to Shabbat? Even on Shabbat, I need to build a holy space. Or no. And then its other side of the debate is, desecrators of Shabbat should be put to death, even if the reason they were desecrating it, even if the reason they were desecrating holy time was because they were creating holy space. And the Midrash comes and says, no, holy time overrides creating holy space.
But not using it.
But not using it, yes. Which is interesting. Now, based on this, let's go to the next Midrash. 6 days work shall be done. Says the Midrash, that Israel should not say, since we are permitted to do work in the Mikdash, we should be permitted to do work in the rest of the country. For that reason, the Torah says, on the seventh day, you shall have for you holiness. For you, it will be holy. But for the place, in Hebrew, the phrase which is used is hamakom, which is very interesting. A lot of different, there are a lot of different nicknames that we use to describe Hashem. The name Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Adonai, the Holy One, Hakadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, the Merciful, Hanun. There's all kinds of different phrases or nicknames, attributes as we call them, or nicknames. It's like I would refer to you as, hey, the tall guy, but I can also refer to him as the tall. I can also refer to him as the fat guy. Okay, just because I'm describing him as tall doesn't mean I can't describe him as heavy. And just because say, the guy with the glasses who's wearing sneakers, Those are not two different people. They're just two different ways. Why would I describing this person now as the guy with the sneakers? Because I'm referring to him in the context of of a workout. Okay, so the fact over here, very interestingly, the Midrash chooses to refer to Hashem as in his nickname of the place, which fits in well here of the debate between, or the tension between holy time and holy space. So let's go back to Midrash, right? So the Israelites will not say we are permitted to do just like we're permitted to do work in the Mikdash, we should be permitted to do work in the rest of the country. For that reason, the Torah says, and on the seventh day you shall have for you holiness. For you it will be holy, meaning holy, and therefore you can't desecrate it by working. But for the place, Hashem, but also referring to the holy place, it will be mundane. What do you mean mundane? It's mundane that you can do work in it. I actually think that if we had more time, there's a lot to try to figure out here of what the Midrash is doing. It seems like insanely sophisticated to me. And I'm not sure I completely understand what the Midrash is fully doing here. But there's just too many hints to too many parts of this discussion. Goes on to say, a day of ceasing of holiness, a Shabbat Shabbaton, a day of ceasing of holiness, Shabbat of Shabbat to Hashem. Whoever does any work on this shall be put to death. Okay, so it's coming and saying, and don't think that the work that's done in the Mikdash on Shabbat, the service, has anything to do. It says that is the holy place, because it is the. So it's interesting here. In the first Midrash, the conclusion was who wins out, holy time or holy space. In the first Midrash, what?
Holy time.
Holy time. That's why you cannot build. You cannot do the mitzvah of building the vessels on Shabbat. According to this Midrash, who wins out, holy place or holy time? Holy place. Because you're allowed to do the korbanot on which are melacha in the Bet HaMikdash, but only in the Bet HaMikdash. A little perplexed. What?
Is that why the very last thing we read about fire in any of your dwellings? Does that mean because you can light fire in the base of Mikdash as part of the service?
Correct. Yes. Yes. So we're gonna see now the third midrash, but I almost brought the midrash because there's a midrash that says exactly what you just said now. There's two midrashim that say exactly what you say right now, meaning in the dwellings you can't, but in the Mikdash you can. But I brought one which is going to throw us for even a bigger loop. And I'm not sure, this is where I kind of didn't have enough time to really process it, because this one is really, I saw this and my eyes just, I said, I don't care what, I'm bringing this one. The Zionist in me had to. It says the following. Dwellings, right? Because the verse said, you shall not kindle things in all of your dwellings. What does it come to teach? So I couldn't bring the whole midrash because the whole midrash is quite long. So I brought it from the middle. What does this come to teach? Now that we said that obligations upon the body are relevant or apply both in Israel and outside of Israel, why did the Torah say dwellings with regards to Shabbat? So I need to just give a short explanation. The Midrash before this comes and says, has a very short debate, very short, very quick, it's over very quickly, whether Shabbat needs to be observed both in Israel and outside of Israel, or just in Israel. Because it comes and says, well, why does it need to say in all of your dwellings? So the Midrash comes and says, oh, the only reason you would have to say don't light fire in all of your dwellings is if the assumption would be that in some of your dwellings you do, and some of your dwellings you don't. And the Midrash kind of assumes that if you made a differentiation between dwellings where you have to keep a mitzvah and other dwellings that you don't have to keep a mitzvah, then what would the logical differentiation be? Israel and outside of Israel. That in Israel you can't light fire, kindle fire on Shabbat, but outside of Israel you could. So the Midrash comes and says, it can't be that's why it says in all your dwellings, because it doesn't make sense to come and say that you would be able to kindle fire on Shabbat in Toronto, and therefore the word dwellings must be there to teach us something else. It can't be that the words in all of your dwellings comes to teach that you can't light fire in Toronto on Shabbat, because that should be obvious. But obviously it wasn't so obvious, because otherwise the Midrash wouldn't have to say it. You guys with me?
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's read but that's what's behind the Midrash, which is astonishing. But the Midrash comes and says, okay, so the dwellings is not to come and teach us that you can't light fire in Toronto on Shabbat, because that is obvious. And especially because we just said it. So now it's obvious. Right? And it says, okay, so therefore, what did the word dwellings actually come to teach us? If it didn't come to teach us that you can't light fire in Toronto on Shabbat, then what did it come to teach us? Okay, now that we said that obligations upon the body are relevant, so saying why is not lighting fire on Toronto? Why is that? Because that's a mitzvah on your body. It's not a mitzvah that is dependent on living in the land of Israel, versus like mitzvah to do with planting and sowing and shemitah. There's a difference between Toronto and Israel. But since observing Shabbat is a mitzvah upon your body, and your body is the same body whether you're in Toronto and in Israel, so now that we said that the obligation upon the body are relevant apply both in Israel and outside of Israel, why did the Torah say dwellings? Why did the Torah say dwellings with regards to Shabbat? So it goes on to say, it is needed as you would have thought that because Shabbat appears in the context of the holidays, it too requires sanctification by a court, similar to holidays. So that is what it came to teach you, that isn't the case. So this is very interesting. Like I said, this is where I kind of stopped in my own thought process. But it comes and says, I don't want you to think of Shabbat like a holiday. Because what's the difference between a holiday and Shabbat? Yes?
Holidays are actually are kovea. They're not something that are set all the time. It has to be established by a court when the holidays will be.
Right.
Shabbat, it always is from a Kodesh Baruch Hu.
Very good.
It always comes.
Perfect. Holidays is man-made time. Is man-made holy time. It's man's control over time and his destiny. Shabbat is not. Right? Shabbat, as you said, is given from Bereshit, from the creation of the world. We have no control over Shabbat. We don't have control when it starts, when it ends. So I'm not sure. Yes?
Holidays aren't man-made. They're based on the new moon. You need the two witnesses to see the new moon, and then you know, like 15 days after is Pesach, etc. It's not completely man-made.
You're right, but when the holidays, what day the holidays will be, we define it. The court, not today anymore, but back in the day. You are right that it's only within certain parameters. Okay, we can't suddenly we can't have a month of 35. We can't have a month. Right.
No, if you don't see it, it's still Shabbat.
It's still Shabbat.
Right. Shabbat begins and ends without you doing anything. Without you doing anything. The holidays are dependent on the court, on people seeing the moon, coming to the court, testifying. Now, yes, there is a process that if no one comes, it's not as if the month continues indefinitely until someone comes and says, hey, I saw the moon. Saying, but there's a mitzvah to sanctify the month, and by that, and by doing that, creating the time frame in which, look, it's a very big difference. It means that we are the ones who decide if Yom Kippur is going to be on Sunday or Monday, or whatever. This day of the week or that day of the week. We control that. There's nothing we can do to change the day that Shabbat will happen. So this midrash seems to be putting Shabbat up against Chag, holy time against holy time. But holy time which is man-made versus holy time which is divinely made, God-made. So I haven't completely formalized where I'm going with all this. Okay? You guys now, I've now shared with you everything I had prepared. Okay? But
Rabbi, that
yeah.
seems more of a tangent than simply saying that the reason dwellings is mentioned is because in the base of Midrash that restriction doesn't apply.
Wait, I'm sorry. Go back. What did you say to the first sentence? I didn't hear.
Well, I'm saying what we just talked about now in the last Midrash, about talking about relating to holidays versus Shabbat. I don't actually see that here as opposed to the more simplistic explanation.
Which was yours.
Dwellings, yeah.
So no, you're right. You're right. I now in retrospect regret not bringing that midrash. Okay, I now regret not bringing that midrash. That would fit in better to with what we were saying. But when I saw this midrash, which is brought on this verse, when it comes and says, when it equates it or negates it with the holidays, it's because in many other places, maybe all, possibly, I'm not sure, but many of the other places where the prohibition of working on Shabbat appears, it appears in the context in the same verses or right before the verses of all the other holidays. Okay, so this midrash connects the word here, dwellings, with the fact that in other places it appears. But I just have I want to share because I think this requires more thought. But it looks to me as if these midrashim, this is the tension that they're playing with. Holy time and holy space. And at the end of the day, it comes and says, listen, we recognize the concept of holy place. We recognize the concept of holy time. And we also recognize the midrash, going back to the first midrash, that each one of these on their own holds within it a certain risk or danger. Holy place, if it's not checked by something else, in this case holy time, it can, meaning seeing something as a holy place or working towards, there's a danger of it swallowing up everything else. And holy time, without going into right now what that means, but in this case, holy time is a time of complete rest, of inactivity, of dedicating oneself to the spiritual. I mean, these are all just beginnings of thinking of where I think this could be taken. But holy time on its own if you understand holy time as removal from the mundane, removal from and dedicating oneself just to God and to that service and to the religious activity, something that has a danger of taking over everything. And also holy place that has its own restrictions and its own also. That's why in the Bet HaMikdash, the service itself, they reside with each other. You can mechalel Shabbat, it's not a chilul Shabbat, so each one gives up something. Holy place, in the Bet HaMikdash service, the holy place gives a little bit space for holy time, and holy time gives up a little place for holy, but everything else, no. Not preparing for it. It's checked by each other. You have this one little special point in the Bet HaMikdash where holy time and holy place reside together, but there's a danger of it being said, oh, look, just like over there, we'll expand it everywhere else. It says, no, careful, don't do that. And don't think that Shabbat and Yom Tov are the same. And I think the idea is not completely full here, but I think there's a lot here that deserves to be thought about and explored, and I think it could have also significant translations into practical or even political things and how we understand the relationship towards Jerusalem, the Mikdash, towards Shabbat, between the relationship between the work week and the and creativity and non-creativity, and work 6 days and don't work the seventh day. I think there's a lot here that deserves a lot of thought that I wish I had more time to explore. But I'll just kind of summarize because my phone is about to turn off.
Do you think, Rabbi, we'll see it again later?
What?
You think we may see this concept again later and be able to develop it somewhere else?
Maybe I will look for it because I don't feel that we've really explored it enough. I think it's just kind of we've whet our appetites. I think there's a lot here that deserves to be thought about and explored and checked with other sources and see how else it comes together. But what was I going to say? Yes, I want to point out that again, this is a very different type of midrash that we did here, and it's a lot more conceptual and legalistic. But it's interesting to see how midrashim look at the things and how they analyze it. And I would just want to end with what we started with, because I think it's a very important point when you hear people discussing where did the rabbis get all this stuff from, all the 39 malachot. We pointed out, and you guys caught on to it at the very beginning, very, very clear, because of the location of this parsha, which seems completely superfluous and completely unnecessary, right before they said building the Mishkan. As far as I'm concerned, that's one of the most important points as far as general knowledge of Hilchot Shabbat. But now we understand there's a much deeper side to it as well, of that to come and say that what it is you're not allowed to do during holy time is the things that create holy space requires a lot of thought, and the relationship between those two concepts and how they and how we live them, or how Torah sees them in the different elements. So I know it's not a whole idea, but I think hopefully it's a lot to think about. Have a good week, everyone.
Take care. Be well.
Kol Tov.